Jason Meyers had just returned from a long weekend fishing trip, the kind where cell service died and peace came alive. His lake property in Crow's Hollow was his escape. No emails, no traffic, and definitely no horror drama. At least, that's what he thought. He pulled into the gravel drive and saw something off. A silver Kia parked crooked on the edge of his private lot. Hood still ticking, door cracked open. He stepped out of his truck and squinted toward the dock. There she was, Karen Aller, vice president of the local hoer. Not just standing on his dock, but measuring it with a worn yellow tape and scribbling on a clipboard like she was inspecting a military base. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was mumbling numbers. Then she knelt down near the waterline, measuring again. Jason felt the knot in his stomach tighten. He didn't live in an HOA-controlled neighborhood. His lake cabin, set just past the boundary line, was outside of their jurisdiction, and Karen knew that. But knowing Karen meant knowing that lines on a map were just mild suggestions to her. Jason stepped forward. You lost? Or just trespassing? Karen spun around. No embarrassment. No apology, just the same smug look she always wore when telling people their grass was half an inch too tall. I'm conducting a compliance review. There's been complaints about improper shoreline development. I'm authorized to check on behalf of the community. Jason tilted his head. Karen, I'm not in your community. She smiled without warmth. The lake affects all residents. Jason, it's about visibility, safety, and harmony. Your dock size violates our extended water access policy. Jason raised an eyebrow. That policy doesn't exist? Karen flipped her clipboard around dramatically, showing a blurry printout of what looked like a neighborhood newsletter from 3 years ago. He stared at it. You printed out a newsletter to enforce rules on property that doesn't belong to you? Karen, apparently unfazed, turned back to the dock and took more notes. You can expect a formal notice. And if you're planning any construction, it'll need to be pre-approved by the board. Jason laughed under his breath. Not a single word Karen said had legal ground. But she was treating his property like a crime scene. What Karen didn't know, though, was that her timing couldn't have been worse. 2 weeks earlier, Jason had filed a quiet complaint with the State Land Use Commission after learning Karen had fined 6 other property owners for landscape violations that involved private, non-HOA land. She'd been creeping beyond her reach for months, and the state had finally agreed to watch. Hidden cameras were already installed, facing his lake edge, and one of them was angled directly at Karen. She wasn't just trespassing, she was now being monitored by a state-level agency. Jason let her keep writing. Come on the outside, boiling on the inside. She took a final photo of his rain barrel, labeled it non-compliant drainage system allowed, like she was in court, and stumped off toward her car. That night, Jason reviewed the footage. Crisp video, clear audio, Karen stating false authority, tampering with property, photographing private installations. He packaged the files and hit send to his state contact. Then he shut his laptop, poured himself a beer, and waited. The clipboard, that was never her power. Her mouth was, and it was about to sink her deeper than lake water. The morning sun filtered through Jason's cabin blinds, but the light did little to ease the tension in his chest. He didn't sleep much after sending the footage to the state's land use investigator. Something about watching someone invade your space, weaponize rules that don't exist, and walk away like they own the ground under your feet. It keeps a man wired. His phone buzzed, and no number. He let it ring once, twice, then answered. Jason Meyers. Yes, this is Deputy Land Commissioner Braden Cullis. I received your file. Jason stood a little straighter. You saw it. I did. And frankly, this is not her first file. But yours is the first one with audio and time-stamped video. You might have just moved this into criminal trespass territory. Jason exhaled. It wasn't relief. Not yet. But it was something. Collis continued. Do you have any objection to us doing a field visit? Unannounced. Jason shook his head. Come anytime. You'll catch more than you think. They agreed on a monitoring window. 72 hours. That's how long the state team would be watching from the sidelines quietly. Invisibly, Karen wouldn't know. Back in the subdivision, Karen wasn't keeping quiet. She'd already emailed the horror board a dramatic compliance alert about Jason's dock, warning them of potential lawsuits and environmental degradation. She copied a fake legal clause she had typed up herself, using a font suspiciously similar to Comic Sans. Karen didn't just like control, she fed on it. And this week, she was starving. That afternoon, Jason drove into town for supplies. By the time he returned, he noticed something on his security system dashboard. An alert triggered at 2:37 p.m. The motion camera near the back edge of his woods had cut movement. He opened the file. There she was again. But this time, Karen wasn't alone. With her was Paul Danning, a board member known for nodding at everything Karen said like he was paid by the yes. They weren't just snooping round. Paul was holding what looked like a measuring wheel, and Karen was scanning the woods with binoculars. She spoke, clearly caught on audio. We'll flag this spot for wetland encroachment. If we can pin drainage violations, we can get him in front of the township. Jason's jaw tightened. She was escalating. Manufacturing violations. That night, Jason sat in his cabin, lights dimmed, cameras recording, waiting. And then he heard something outside. Footsteps. This time, soft and singular. He rose quietly and looked through the blinds. A small flashlight beam danced across his gravel path. It wasn't Karen. It wasn't Paul. It was a man in state uniform, a conservation officer. Jason stepped outside. The man identified himself. I'm with the commissioner's office, here for field documentation. May I? Jason led him round back. The officer unpacked a small camera tripod, angled it toward the woods, and placed a wildlife monitoring sticker nearby. Jason asked, She's done this to others, hasn't she? The man didn't flinch. We've had 4 complaints in the last 6 months, but no one had what you have. People talk. You delivered proof. Jason folded his arms. So what happens now? The officer smiled faintly. Now we watch, but here's the thing. If she comes back again, it won't just be trespassing. It'll be obstruction, evidence tampering, and possibly impersonating an official. She's gone too far. Jason didn't smile back. He didn't need to. He just pointed toward the forest. She'll be back. Meanwhile, across the subdivision, Karen was in her kitchen making a bullet point list for the next board meeting. She titled it, Jason Meyers, Pattern of Noncompliance. But her screen blinked twice. A notification. Suspicious activity detected near your property. Source, Crow's Hollow Lake Monitor. Karen clicked the link, but it wouldn't open. It rerouted to a blank page. She tried again. Still blank. Her face shifted. For the first time, Karen didn't feel in control, and she didn't know that the state wasn't just watching Jason anymore. They had eyes on her yard, too. Karen Aller had built her reputation on 2 things, fear and fine print. She didn't need real authority, just the appearance of it, and for years, that had been enough to scare new homeowners into submission. But lately, cracks were forming. Jason Meyers was a problem she hadn't anticipated. He wasn't just resisting, He was recording. And worse, someone was feeding information to people she didn't recognize. That night, Karen sat in her dimly lit home office, flipping through old HOA rule books and scribbled margin notes. The plastic tabs she color-coded 5 years ago now bent like wilting leaves. She flipped to section 9.3, extended impact oversight. It was a clause she had invented, typed into a neighborhood PDF newsletter, and printed out as if it were law. She'd used it dozens of times to extend the HOA's imaginary reach past its legal border. Now she needed to make it real. She picked up the phone and called Paul Danning. "Paul, I need you to bring the signed attendance logs to the next board meeting." "All of them?" Paul yawned on the other end. "Is this about the late guy?" Karen's tone sharpened. "This is about community standards. He's building non-compliant structures, and I have reason to believe there's wildlife violations too." Paul hesitated. "Karen, the last time we went out there, it felt off, like he knew we were coming." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Then we stay ahead, and quiet. The board moves as one." Back at the cabin, Jason stood by his dock, phone in hand, watching the live feed from his remote camera system. It had picked up something odd the night before, a car pulling into the far corner of the tree line just after midnight. Headlights stayed off. The figure didn't cross the fence, but it hovered near it, watched, waited. He rewound the footage, zoomed in. It wasn't Karen. It wasn't Paul. It was someone else entirely, an older man, heavy-set, moving like he knew the place. Jason emailed the file to Braden Cullis, the deputy land commissioner. The reply came back fast. "We know him. Names: Russell Tyne, retired contractor. Had dealings with the HOA 5 years ago. Nothing legal stuck." But there were whispers. Jason's stomach turned. Karen was calling in outside help now. 2 days later, a white sedan with government plates pulled into Jason's driveway. Braden stepped out with a thick folder in hand. "You got a minute?" he asked. Jason waved him up to the porch. Braden sat, opened the folder, and laid out several documents: permit violations, falsified complaints, and one photo in particular. Karen, in 2019, posing in front of a property under construction. She claimed it was part of an HOA community improvement project, Braden said, but the funding trail led to her sister-in-law's account. Jason leaned forward. "Why hasn't anyone stopped her?" Braden shrugged. "Until you, no one had enough proof in one place. But now the state's watching her closely. What we need now is the final incident. Something direct, something on record." Jason tapped his finger on the railing. "She'll come back. She needs to win. That's her weakness." And Karen did come back. Just before dusk the next evening, her SUV crept down the dirt path near Jason's border. She wore cargo boots this time, and brought measuring flags and caution tape. Her plan marked Jason's property as an ecological hazard zone using a fake community report she drafted the night before. She stepped past the posted private property signs without pause. Jason watched from inside. He didn't go out, didn't yell, didn't make a sound, because just behind Karen, crouched in the brush with a long lens camera, was an officer from the state's Environmental Violations Division, the same officer who had visited Jason days before. Karen was speaking out loud again. She always did when she wanted it on record. "This entire slope is eroding. It's a danger to the watershed. I'll have this flagged and blocked by tomorrow. Doesn't matter if he likes it." She planted the caution tape in the sill. Snap. The shutter clicked. By the time Karen reached her SUV, she still thought she'd won. She didn't know her words were now part of an official state report. She didn't know the man with the camera had already filed it, and she definitely didn't know that tomorrow Her own yard would be visited for something buried in her shed. Something Jason had no idea even existed. But the state did. And they were about to uncover it. Karen Aller never liked questions she didn't write herself. She liked making rules, not answering to them. So when she pulled into her driveway the next morning and saw an unmarked black SUV park on the curb across from her house, something shifted in her gut. She didn't stop, didn't wave. Just drove into her garage like nothing was wrong. Inside, she poured herself a cup of coffee with hands that trembled slightly. Then she opened her laptop and started writing up an emergency violation notice against Jason Meyers for non-permitted wetland deforestation, another made-up infraction, complete with citations to a park district policy that had expired in 2009. But before she could print it, there was a knock on her door. Not the doorbell. A knock. Slow, intentional. She walked over and peeked through the side window. Two men stood there, both in dark polos, one holding a folder, the other wearing a vest with a small embroidered patch. State Environmental Compliance Division. Karen opened the door halfway. "Is this about the goose nests?" she asked quickly. The taller man smiled. "Actually, this is about a storage structure in your backyard. Your horror paperwork lists it as a tool shed. We've received a tip that it might be used to store prohibited materials." Karen blinked. "Excuse me, would you mind if we took a look?" She paused. "Do you have a warrant?" The second man handed her a folded sheet. "Inspection order, signed yesterday afternoon. Under Section 17B of your community's Environmental Oversight Agreement, of which you're a listed officer, we have jurisdiction for a property check." Karen opened her mouth to argue, then shut it. Slowly, she stepped aside. "Fine, but I want it noted I think this is harassment." Out back, Karen fumbled with the padlock on the shed door. The moment it opened, the officers exchanged a quick glance. Inside, tucked between bags of fertilizer and paint cans, was a blue barrel. Industrial, sealed tight. "Can you open that for us, Mum?" One asked. Karen hesitated. "It's just for runoff collection, left over from a project summers ago, totally sealed. Then it shouldn't be a problem." Hands shaking, she twisted the lid. The chemical smell hit fast, too strong, too familiar. Inside the barrel were several rusted metal stakes, what looked like stormwater sampling kits, and a black binder. One of the officers pulled on gloves and carefully lifted the binder out. Inside, dozens of pages, property reports, cell tests, even altered compliance letters. But what mattered most were the signed forms showing Karen's name on inspections for parcels outside of her jurisdiction. Backdated and forged. The man flipped to one marked Henderson Creek, private lot 17. Jason's lot. Karen felt the color drain from her face. I didn't file those with intent. We're going to take this with us, Mom." "What happens now?" The officer didn't answer. He just looked at her the way someone might look at a crumbling dam right before the flood. Meanwhile, across town, Jason sat on his porch with a cold drink and his dog Hank curled up by his feet. His phone buzzed. Text from Braden Cullis. "Search complete. She handed us evidence with both hands. You'll hear from legal soon. Don't engage her." Jason stared at the screen for a while, then glanced across the lake. A quiet voice inside him wanted to laugh. Another voice, the one that had been burned to many times, told him not to, because he knew Karen, and he knew when cornered, people like her don't apologize. They doubled down. Later that night, Karen sat alone in her kitchen. The house felt colder than usual. On her table was a note, one from her lawyer. She hadn't even read it yet. Instead, she was typing a new draft into her laptop. "Special emergency meeting. full recall of horror board members. If she went down, she wasn't going alone. Karen didn't sleep. Not after the shed inspection. Not after the officer took the barrel and the binder. Not even after her lawyer advised her sternly to stop contacting the board, Jason, or anyone else involved. So what did she do? She scheduled a mandatory emergency horror board meeting, claimed it was about rampant misinformation, aggressive outsiders, and infiltration of horror integrity. The email she blasted out at 6:12 a.m. had no agenda, no details, just fear and fire. 10 hours later, Karen stood at the front of the community clubhouse wearing a blazer to sizes too tight and a smile. 5 shades too forced, only for board members showed up. Paul Danning, bless his sleepy loyalty, came dragging his feet. 2 others sat silently, arms crossed. One, the treasurer, looked like he was trying to figure out if this meeting was legal. Karen clapped her hands. Let's begin, Paul whispered. Begin what? She cleared her throat. Due to rapidly escalating hostility by property owner Jason Meyers, I propose we initiate a full site shutdown of lake adjacent properties pending board review, effective immediately. The room fell into stunned silence. A young member, Lisa, frowned. You mean, shut down all access to the lake? Karen nodded once. All docks, all constructions, all private access, until we confirm who's undermining the safety and legal standing of this association. Lisa looked genuinely confused. That sounds retaliatory. Karen's tone stiffened. It's protective. We're being targeted. I've been unfairly investigated by people with no understanding of our community. The treasurer raised an eyebrow. The people investigating you were from the state, Karen. She didn't blink. Exactly. Overreach. That's what this is, Paul. For once, didn't back her up. Karen's voice rose. Jason Meyers has weaponized his cameras and filed state-level reports against your board this very body. I have served this community for 9 years and now I'm being interrogated like a criminal. Lisa looked down at the table. Karen, you forged property inspection forms. You signed off on environmental documents that don't exist. That's not just a violation of policy, that's legal. Karen stepped back, lips trembling. I made this neighborhood better, safer. Lisa didn't answer that. Instead, she picked up her phone and stood. I move for a motion of censure pending suspension of Karen Aller as vice president until further notice. Paul blinked. Wait, what? The treasurer nodded slowly. Seconded. Karen stared in disbelief. You can't do this. This meeting was my call. I have the agenda. Lisa cut her off. No agenda was filed. No quorum was established. And the state already notified us they're opening formal hearings. You're not protecting this board anymore. You're exposing it. Karen's face changed in a way no one in that room had ever seen. It wasn't rage. It wasn't control. It was something worse. She was scared. And suddenly, she didn't know where to put that fear. Back at the lake, Jason received a knock-knock from the state this time. But from Lisa herself. She stood at his fence line, holding a manila folder. I thought you should see this, she said, handing it over. Inside, meeting transcripts, or internal notices, and a list of fabricated infractions Karen had filed against over a dozen homeowners' names, dates, and phony citations going back 3 years. People trusted her, Lisa said. She had us fooled. But you didn't back down. Jason nodded. I didn't have to. She overplayed herself. Lisa hesitated. She's not done. Not yet. But the board's turning. Jason looked out over the lake. The sun was dipping low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the dock, the same dock Karen had tried to use against him. I don't Need her done, Jason said. I just need her out of people's lives. Lisa offered a tired smile. We're working on that. That night, Jason opened the manila folder again. He flipped to one of the fabricated violations a notice Karen had issued to a family too. Lots down for excessive toddler noise during Hoa-sanctioned quiet hours. Jason shook his head. Karen really thought she was judge, jury, and architect of reality. But now the scaffolding was crumbling. And as Jason locked his door for the night, he had no idea that Karen was preparing one last desperate move, something she thought would fix everything. She was heading back to the lake, but this time, she wasn't coming with a clipboard. She was coming with a permit she forged herself, and the only person who could stop her was already one step ahead. The lake was quiet that morning, too quiet. Even the birds kept their distance, as if they sensed something unnatural was creeping into Crow's Hollow. Jason Meyers stepped onto his dock with coffee in hand. His dog Hank sniffing the planks like they'd been tampered with. Jason's cameras had picked up nothing overnight, but something still felt off. Then his phone buzzed. A neighbor texted, "Karen's back. She's at lot 12, with a guy in a hard hat." Jason's heart tightened. Lot 12 bordered his eastern property line, the side with the drainage trench Karen had claimed was non-compliant. He pulled up his live cam feed and scanned the edge of the frame. There she was, Karen, khakis tucked into boots, clipboard in one hand, rolled up permit in the other. She was pointing, pacing, and barking instructions at a confused-looking contractor hauling caution stakes from his truck. Jason zoomed in on the permit. It looked official, letterhead, a bold seal, signature at the bottom. But he knew better. The real environmental permits came with digital tracking and were never issued in print by hand. He'd spoken to enough officials to recognize the signs. Jason hit record on every camera. Down at lot 12, Karen was in rare form. "I need the trench widened exactly to feet. Push the runoff back toward the basin. We'll call it a natural correction to a misplaced boundary line." The contractor hesitated. "Is this part of a county project?" Karen smiled. "It's been approved. We're just catching up." Behind her, Jason stepped out of the woods. "Catch up with what?" "Karen, your imagination." She turned slowly. "You're trespassing." He pointed to the gravel line. "This is my property." Karen waved the permit like a flag. "This land's runoff zone was misregistered. I have documentation from the county showing it's subject to HOA remediation. I'm correcting it before someone gets hurt." Jason walked straight up to her and held out his hand. "Let me see the permit." Karen pulled it back. "You don't have the authority." Jason took out his phone, tapped the screen, and put it on speaker. A voice answered, "State Land Commissioner's Office. How can I help?" Jason spoke clearly. "Brayden, it's Jason Meyers. Karen's on my property with a permit claiming HOA remediation rights. She's got a contractor here. Claims it's from your office." Silence for a beat. Then, "She does not have a valid permit. I need you to keep her there. Do not engage physically. An officer is already on the way." Jason smiled thinly. "Copy that." Karen paled. "You're bluffing." Jason kept recording. "Sure. Let's wait and see." 10 minutes later, a marked county truck pulled into the clearing. A woman stepped out, badge on her belt, and clipboard in hand. "An actual one, ma'am," the officer said. "You're executing unauthorized work on a regulated seal zone. That's a violation of multiple environmental codes." Karen tried to explain. "I have the paperwork right here. Look, it was signed by the deputy commission." The officer looked it over. "This is a copy-paste of a real permit, but it's not issued to your HOA. It's not even formatted properly. And that signature, It's missing the watermark. Karen stood frozen, mouth parted, like her brain had rebooted mid-command. The contractor, sensing disaster, quietly began repacking his gear. The officer folded the paper, slid it into an evidence sleeve, and looked at Jason. You'll need to give a statement, Mr. Meyers. We're going to treat this as forgery and attempted land manipulation. Jason nodded. I've got camera footage, live recordings, and for eyewitnesses. She's done this before. Karen suddenly stepped forward. I wasn't forging anything. I was protecting this land. You don't understand, he's the one exploiting the shoreline. The officer didn't flinch. Ma'am, you're under investigation for multiple state violations. I'd advise you stop talking. But Karen couldn't stop. Her voice cracked. I made this community. I kept it from turning into a dump. Without me, this lake would have been overrun with dogs and broken fences and... Jason's voice cut her off. Calm and razor sharp. It's not the lake you were protecting. It was the fantasy that you controlled everything around it. As Karen was escorted to the officer's vehicle for questioning, a dozen quiet neighbors watched from across the street, phones in hand, recording. Whispers followed her like shadows. She wasn't just losing control, she'd already lost it. That night, Jason sat on the dock, skipping stones with Hank by his side. He'd been fighting shadows for months. But now, the sun was rising. What he didn't know yet was that Karen's downfall would unearth one last buried secret. Something that didn't come from her clipboard or her shed, but from the very land beneath his feet. The morning after Karen's forged permit stunt, the neighborhood felt lighter, like the air had finally stopped holding its breath. Word traveled fast in Crow's Hollow. By breakfast, most residents had seen the footage of her being escorted to the county vehicle. Some watched twice. Jason Meyers didn't celebrate. Not yet. Karen wasn't in jail, just under formal investigation, and the damage she caused, fabricated citations, neighbor disputes, forged documents, was still unraveling. But there was something else bothering him now. Something that didn't fit. Why was Karen so obsessed with Lot 12? Why did she drag a contractor out there, forge a permit, and try to move earth just feet from the trench she'd accused him of misplacing? She never did anything without a motive. Jason paced his property, boots crunching through leaves, until he reached the far end of the trench. The soil still looked disturbed from the day before. He crouched, ran a hand over the edge, and felt something hard. Not a rock, a corner. He dug slowly, carefully. 3 inches down, the tip of a small metal box appeared, rusted, bent, but unmistakably man-made. Jason froze. He pulled it out, pried it open. Inside, a stack of documents sealed in a plastic sleeve, brittle with time, and a microcassette recorder with fading tape. He stood there for a long moment, staring into a box that didn't belong to him. He took it inside. Hours later, in a state conference room 30 miles away, Braden Collis stared at the contents laid before him. Where exactly did you find this? He asked. Jason crossed his arms. Buried under the trench Karen tried to mark for excavation. Braden flipped through the paperwork. Each form was stamped with dates from 2002. They were part of a shoreline development proposal, plans for a private marina that had been denied for violating state wetland protections. But the denial letter wasn't the shocker. It was the approval letter that followed, dated just 1 month later. Stamped by a now defunct contractor, and signed by Russell Tyne. Jason leaned forward. That's the guy Karen brought to the property line late one night. You said he was a retired contractor. Braden nodded slowly. He was also investigated in 2003 for bribery involving falsified permits. Nothing ever stuck. Jason pointed at the tape. You listened to that yet? Brayden hit play. A scratchy voice filled the room. Male, older, raspy. Russ, you said this land was outside protected zones. You said the horror would back it. If this goes sideways, I'm holding you responsible. I signed the damn thing. But I'm not going down for wetland violations. Karen promised it was clean. Braden's eyes narrowed. Karen. Jason didn't blink. How deep was she in it? Brayden fast-forwarded the tape. Another voice. Female, nervous but recognizable. They won't trace it. We refile through the association and list it under future projects. The lakefront gets developed quietly. No permits pulled through the county. Jason sat back. She's been covering this for over 20 years. Brayden stared at the file. Silence. This isn't just horror abuse anymore. This is historic land fraud and environmental violation under false corporate pretense. Jason took a breath. Can the state act? Brayden looked up. Jason, you just opened a case that could bury her, not just in court, but in federal code. She's not walking away from this. Back at Crow's Hollow, Karen paced her kitchen floor like a caged animal. Her phone was off. Her email shut down. The board had voted her out formally this time, but she wasn't done. In her hands was a last resort, a letter she'd written to the local paper, spinning her harassment as political revenge. She blamed Jason, claimed the state was colluding with anti-horror radicals. But when she opened her front door to drop it in the mailbox, two plainclothes agents stood waiting. One of them held up a badge. Karen Aller, we need to ask you a few questions about a 2000 to shoreline development permit filed under your name. You may want your attorney present. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The clipboard in her hand slid down her leg and hit the porch with a dull, final thud. That night, Jason stood by the water with the wind moving over the lake like an apology. He stared at the trench, now sealed and calm, and wondered how long the box had been buried there. And how many lives Karen had quietly twisted around it. The truth was out, but the story wasn't over. Because the final piece, the one thing Karen couldn't forge, was already in motion, and it would strike before sunrise. The sun rose slow and red over Crow's Hollow Lake, but its warmth didn't reach Karen Aller. She sat in the back of a government SUV, hands clenched in her lap, eyes fixed on her front lawn, where yellow tape now marked off a boundary she used to control. Her mailbox had been emptied by federal agents. Her shed was padlocked by the Environmental Crimes Unit, and her clipboard, her symbol of control, was sealed in an evidence bag like a murder weapon. Jason Meyers watched it all unfold from his deck, coffee in hand, dog by his side. It should have felt like victory, but a DID in single quotes T. Not yet, because Jason knew that the real damage Karen had caused couldn't be reversed with a single arrest or an agent's badge. She'd poisoned the spirit of the neighborhood, turned good people against each other, made fear the foundation of community. And if he didn't tell the truth, all of it, she'd get to rewrite the ending, even from behind a desk. That afternoon, Jason drafted a letter of his own, not to the paper, not to the horror board, but to the people who mattered most, his neighbors. He printed 25 copies, walked to each door personally, left them with a simple note. Tonight, 7 p.m., public dock, bring a chair, at 7:01. Folding chairs creak and scrape across the old planks of the lake's communal dock. Neighbors arrived in quiet pairs, glancing at each other like veterans of the same silent war. Jason stood near the edge, a portable speaker beside him, a single sheet in his hands. No podium, no board, no badge. Just truth. He cleared his throat. You all know what happened this week, but what you don't know is why. And if you'll give me 5 minutes, I'll tell you. Eyes locked on him. No interruptions. Jason spoke softly but steadily about the buried permits from 2002, the falsified signatures, the illegal marina project Karen tried to push through. He explained how she used made-up citations to pressure property owners, how she manipulated environmental language to expand the HOA's power beyond its borders. He held up the cassette tape. She didn't just break into my land, she broke into our trust, our peace. A long silence followed. Then a voice from the crowd, Paul Danning, said what no one expected. She made me lie on a compliance report in 2019. Said if I didn't, I'd lose my seat. Jason looked at him. You're not the only one. Lisa stood too. She told me the state wouldn't act unless we made them scared. She told me that paper beats people. Another man raised his hand. She threatened my wife with $100 fine for planting tulips. Said they were too reflective. Laughter broke the tension. Just a little. Then Jason pulled out one last item. A photo, mounted on a poster board. It was a drone shot taken 3 weeks earlier. It showed Karen, on Jason's dock, clipboard in hand. Mid-sentence, I sent this to the state, Jason said. This photo launched an investigation. It's also the last time she tried to control anyone from a dock she didn't own. He turned it around. Underneath, a single line was written, power only works if we let it. 2 weeks later, the whole board held a public vote. The entire structure was overhauled. Karen was officially banned from holding any leadership role in the community again. Her fines were dismissed. Her victims reimbursed. And as for the land she'd tried to seize, it was now under state protection, a permanent wetland zone, with a new sign posted by the shore, preserved land. Community monitor Jason stood before it one morning, feeling the breeze move through the trees like a quiet promise. Karen's trial was still pending, but her control gone. She wasn't feared anymore. She was forgotten. And as Jason walked back to his cabin, past blooming tulips and kids playing by the lake she tried to privatize, he finally smiled, because peace had returned. Not because the rules changed, but because the people did.